everybody. My name is Scott Verchin. I'm an independent business consultant based in New York. I'm also an aviation enthusiast and a longtime business and leisure traveler. And I have here with me the founders of the Altitude app, Henry Tenby and Niels, also the owners of Jetflix TV. And given the current state of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're going to be talking about the commercial passenger experience in terms of aviation and what this new world is going to look like once we get the all clear and we're allowed to travel again. So, Henry, I'll start with you on some of your perspectives.
Well, I guess first of all, we have to start with the definition of the all clear. My personal view is that the definition of all clear means that the line's been flattened 100%, and or there's a vaccine, so people can travel with a fair degree of certainty that they're not going to be infected. I don't know if how long that's going to take, or if you guys have a different take on that, but I think that would be the context of this conversation as we move forward.
Excellent point. And there's a lot of unknowns that we're still trying to determine here. And let's make assumptions, Niels, that we know that we have flattened the curve and we are safe to travel. And the airlines are now running at the capacities of similar numbers to pre-COVID-19. What do you see as some visual cues that the experience for the passenger could be different?
Well, I think it all starts the check-in, right? It will be, I think, different in the sense that we might be a bit more squeamish in, getting germs and whatnot on our hands. So maybe the check-in will be fully digitally. We don't have a paper boarding ticket. We have only mobile available. And I think also maybe something in the lines of once we are able to start traveling again, that the 6 foot of separation still will be maintained. So the lines will be longer.
Yes.
With more space in between, right? I think those are one of the first things once it all starts up again that we will see.
It's a very good point. I agree. I'd like to just add to that, because of that spacing, I think we might have to account for a longer period of advance time for check-in. 45 minutes is kind of the minimum limit for a domestic flight. I think passengers may need to budget, and airlines may need to enforce longer times than that.
Mm-hmm. I do agree. I mean, here in the United States, we're told to get to the airport 2 hours prior to departure time for domestic flights, 3 hours for international flights, which already seems like a long time. And this, of course, is a fallout after the 9/11 tragedies. And so we are, as a flying public, are really interested in hearing about what's going to be different beyond that once we're in the cabin. So is there going to be a cutback of certain amenities like food and beverage? Delta just made an announcement that they are, at least during this period of time, are pulling back on all kinds of food and beverage services for flights that are under 2,200 miles or 4 hours in length.
Well, those are all good points, but I think there's going to be even more changes that will be noticeable before the passenger gets into the cabin, which we will discuss shortly. Even from the perspective of airport lounges, I believe that the lounges could become more expensive, harder to access. People will be wanting the comfort and safety of a lounge instead of having to be in a very or potentially crowded boarding area. So it'll be more costly to get into lounges. There'll be more lineups to get into lounges. I think lounges are going to be more popular. That's one aspect. And then a good friend of mine who's a travel agent was telling me that he sees changes ahead from the travel agent booking perspective. I don't know if any of you are aware, but a lot of passengers that have booked through the booking engines during this crisis have had a great deal of difficulty in sorting their travel plans. Have any of you have heard of the problems that are going on?
Yes. I've always been a firm believer, I know many people in the industry feel the same way, that you should book your flight directly with the airline.
Exactly.
And why you may get a few dollar savings on going through a booking or an Orbitz or something to that caliber, if you are in a position when there is something like this happening, or even something less severe like just a bad winter storm, the airlines look at you differently. They treat
Absolutely.
you like you're not a customer of Delta. You're a customer of Booking. Deal with Booking and get that problem resolved on your own. So I think, Henry, you're hitting the nail on the head here. I think the airlines are going to want more control over that audience.
And the passengers themselves aren't going to want to be bottom of the barrel when it comes time to getting the airline's attention if there's a problem. And that's exactly what's happened to the passengers who have booked through the booking engines.
Yeah. Another concern that I wonder, because obviously the airlines are losing a lot of money, and there's the first wave of concern as to what airlines are going to be still with us when we return. The smaller carriers in certain regional markets may not be able to survive this, and so do those routes get gobbled up by the bigger carriers, the alliances, and so forth? And if so, we knew about Flybe, they were the first to go. We heard the other day about Lufthansa grounding German wings. Who do we see that's going to emerge out of this commercially or financially stronger and more powerful? And who are we going to see disappear from the landscape?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think one of the biggest things is the strongest players right now, I think, are the ones with the biggest network. And the best, alliance, I'd say. KLM Air France is successful in the way that they have a route network that's been very well thought out and connected Paris and Amsterdam to the world, basically. So, airlines like that, they have more of a, they have a stronger foot in the earth, so to say, than, for instance, Adria Airways in the past, right? It's a small regional carrier, didn't have a huge network. It had some code shares, but it's not the same as an alliance, right? It's small, and it didn't take long before it went downhill for them. So I think if the companies such as Delta, American stay with their alliances and keep up the network, I think they will definitely stick around. And also, of course, what we must not forget is that American, Delta, they all have these small regional carriers that work flights for them, like SkyWest or those smaller regional airlines. And if they cease to or they stop their operations, that will be a huge blow to the route network of American and a lot of American legacy carriers, I'd say, which would mean that they would have to pick up the routes on their own, which is too costly for them themselves, I think. So that's definitely an interesting point of view.
No, I was going to say, and the word that we're hearing a lot is bailout. And so through stimulus packages and other different government involvement to help resurrect certain industries, in particular the airline industry. In Europe, Niels, since you're based there, what do we hear about national carriers being reacquired by their governments?
Well, yeah, that is definitely talk of the day here in Europe. I mean, the bigger carriers here, Lufthansa, and a lot of the legacy carriers here in Europe have already mentioned it in the media. Lufthansa is now recently putting away 6 Airbus A380 aircraft, which are relatively new. Still, I can vividly remember when they came out, and they're already sending them to be scrapped. So that's definitely saying something about the seriousness of the situation. The liquidity is a big problem, I think. A lot of airlines have a lot of aircraft, and parked aircraft are the most expensive because they still need maintenance. So yeah, definitely, the money keeps going out, but a lot less money keeps getting in. So that's I think a big reason why a lot of airlines in Europe have already stated in the media that they will need at some point in the near future need to be built out.
Excellent.
Yeah, I was going to
be a story we follow as this progresses. Go ahead, Henry.
I think to add to that, also the low-cost carrier and ultra low-cost carrier business model may need to be re-looked at as to whether it's entirely valid and will be as successful in the future as it has been in the past. The reason I state that is because we were wanting to save a lot of money and willing to accept very, very high density seating for that. But COVID changes all that. Do you really want to sit with somebody 4 inches from your nose and in an 18-inch wide seat when you have risks of the proportion that COVID brings to the situation? So I think there might be a shift away from saving as much as possible and maximizing one's safety. So that means the whole business models of all these low-cost carriers may have to be revamped, which brings us back to your question, Scott, and that is the major carriers that have these low-cost carrier subsidiaries, German Wings, Air Canada Rouge, in Asia they have them, in Australia, they're quite prevalent in the industry. Many of the flag carrier airlines may just absorb these operations back into the mother carrier because they don't make business sense in the post-COVID world. It'll be interesting to see if that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's been very well documented that airlines are still flying at a fraction of the capacities that they were pre-COVID-19. I've been reading here in the States that airlines are flying at about 90% less than what they used to be. Now, when airlines don't fly for a certain amount of time, they lose their slots at key airports and key hubs. So, Henry, what have you heard about airlines? Because you've been very vocal about passenger airlines should not be in the air, just limited to cargo travel. What are we hearing about airlines doing to retain those spots at key airports?
Yeah, well, the only thing that I've heard is out of London, and this was already going back a few weeks ago, Virgin Atlantic were operating flights, very empty flights, to maintain their slots. But that was 2 weeks ago. So I don't know if the slot rules and, use it or lose it is still in effect at the major airports, particularly at Heathrow, because there is, 98% reduction in flying in Europe. I don't know about the US either. Maybe that's part of why the major US airlines are still operating. There hasn't been I haven't seen any discussion of that in the media. And I suspect that if the governing authorities were smart, they wouldn't make that as an issue, because I don't think it would look very good given the situation. So hopefully that might be relaxed given where we're at.
Yeah. Do either of you two have a viewpoint on how loyalty programs are going to be impacted by this?
Well, yes, I have heard from multiple sources that a lot of the status of the frequent flyer programs, such as Platinum or whatever, Diamond, whatever it's called with a specific airline, they've been frozen until further notice. So that means the passengers will stay in the same rank until this whole COVID-19 situation resolves itself, hopefully at least soon. But yeah, so that's, I think, the first reaction of the industry, and the second will, of course, be definitely. I think they're going to look a bit more to the revenue side of things. How do these people? We might get a little bit less passengers than pre-COVID-19. How can we get maximum, optimization revenue-wise with all that, right? It's difficult to say, I guess, but yeah, from my perspective, I think it might be a bit harder in the near future to get to a certain level. You really need to fly a lot, I think. And yeah, I guess that makes it a bit more exclusive as well.
You make a good point, because over the last several years, the major carriers have changed their loyalty rewards program to a revenue model as opposed to miles traveled, catering to their best customers who are flying in first and business and premium classes. And so I foresee a widening of the gap in the classes of travel going forward. And so is the experience going to be better in premium classes and even less accommodating for people sitting in economy? Henry, any thoughts on that area?
Well, I think all of the service will be reduced. just because of people wanting to be safer and have less touch points to other people around them. So I believe that we're going to see a reduction in service in all classes, but the frequent flyer program, I think that you're going to see more people joining them, because the frequent flyer program gives you the ability to fly in a higher class by giving up points. So people are going to value their space and their comfort. So there'll be more attraction, there'll be more people gravitating towards the frequent flyer programs to get into business class or a premium economy where they've got more space. So as Niels indicated, the airlines may not be as generous with the points given increased demand in the programs. So I think they're interconnected. The questions are good, but I think the passengers will be the driving force in just how valuable these points become as demand for more bodily space on board becomes more pent up after COVID. That's my view.
Exactly. But I want to add to that as well. It all depends on how long the crisis will continue on for. I mean, if it, hypothetically speaking, if it would be resolved in 6 months, let's say, there would be a hypothetical vaccine, which is of course unlikely, but who knows, right? I think the outcome of that would be very different from if it would, persist for a longer period of time, a year and a half. So yeah, that's definitely also something you need to take into account.
Right, but I do think there'll be a refocus on keeping passengers safe, and the airline that can provide the best safety to their passengers on board, that might be every bit as important as customer service was in the past. So it'll be interesting to see if passenger service goes towards the safety aspect as opposed to increased service.
Right.
Yeah, that's going to be a big situation for airlines to start assessing. Are they going to be catering more to Wall Street, or are they going to be catering more towards their customer base? And that we'll find out in due time as people start traveling again. My guess is the airlines will not return to full capacities on many routes like they saw previously. It'll be a gradual migration towards that. So in your both professional opinions, because we're running out of time here, Henry, when do we think we get back to what we call normal aviation travel?
That's a very, very good question. My personal view was that it was going to be 2 months of no flying, closed airspace to flatten the curve. And then I figured it was going to take approximately 6 months for volumes to get back to close to where they might be. But I was speaking to a friend of mine today who works for a major European airline, and they have a lot more conservative view than the North American carriers. Their view over in Europe is that it would take 1 year for them to get to 70% of where they were pre-COVID. So they're a lot more conservative in Europe than we are here in North America. So let's hope that we're right in North America. But I think as airline executives, the prudent course of action is to plan for worst case scenario and hope for best case scenario.
Excellent. Thank you. Niels, your point of view?
Well, I don't know. It's just the closing of airspace. I've changed my opinion about that a little bit. Don't think it's necessarily the final solution. I think if the airspace would close for 2 weeks, which is of course the incubation time of the coronavirus, if they would start at least getting flights up from that point on in North America, at least slowly, I think with home quarantine and whatnot, a lot can be gained. Since of course the situation in North America is quite dire right now, so let's hope that it all gets better very soon. But from that point on, it's definitely how much security measures are being put in place, right? I mean, the airline industry wants to get back to normal business as usual, but right now that's not possible. So they might, we might see things like temperature control. You need maybe a form to fill out with if you have any ailments at the moment, right? So
or proof of vaccination.
proof of vaccine. Who knows, right? So it depends, but it could be up to a year maybe for volumes to be normalized again, I guess.
We'll have to wait and see. And this is a story that's going to be ongoing, and we're going to be charting, all the ups and downs. And gentlemen, I thank you for lending us your expertise and insight. And let's do this again soon.
Thank you. Our
Very
pleasure.
cool.
Thank you, Scott.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, and stay safe, everybody.
Same here. Stay safe. Be rim healthy.